The hidden nourishment of being alone. Have you ever noticed how strangely exhausted you feel after a day of constant social interaction, as if something deeper than your physical energy has been drained? And have you noticed, in contrast, that feeling of clarity and renewal that emerges after a period of genuine solitude? It's no coincidence. There's something in the experience of solitude that nourishes the human spirit in a way that no social interaction, however pleasant, can replicate. Think about the truly wise people you know, personally or through their works. Have you noticed how almost all of them seek and value significant periods of isolation, not out of antisocial behavior or misanthropy, but because they've discovered something our noisy, hyper-connected culture seems determined to make us forget? Solitude is not a condition to be avoided, but a sacred space to be cultivated. Two of the most profound thinkers who explored this truth were Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher who influenced figures like Nietzsche and Freud, and Henry David Thoreau, the American naturalist and writer who revolutionized our understanding of the relationship between humans and nature. Separated by an ocean and radically different cultural contexts, both reached the same disturbing conclusion. Solitude not only allows us to think more clearly, it allows us to be who we truly are. Today, I'll share with you why history's wisest minds deliberately sought solitude, how our modern culture pulls us away from this essential practice, and most importantly, how you can reclaim the transformative power of voluntary isolation in a world that seems designed to make it impossible. And if you're someone who, after 5 minutes in the family group chat, starts considering becoming a hermit, congratulations, Schopenhauer would understand you. Subscribe to the channel, because if you're going to isolate yourself from the world, you might as well do it in good philosophical company while pretending you're just taking a break from social media. The freedom of being alone. Schopenhauer and Thoreau's discovery. Arthur Schopenhauer wrote something surprising in his essay, Parerga and Paralipomena. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free. This statement might seem extreme, but Schopenhauer was identifying something fundamental about human nature that modern neuroscience now confirms. In the constant presence of others, we unconsciously shape our thoughts, behaviors, and even our identity to meet social expectations. Henry David Thoreau, who spent 2 years living in relative solitude in the woods near Walden Pond, expressed a similar sentiment. I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude. For him, voluntary isolation wasn't a rejection of humanity, but a deeper immersion in himself, and by extension, a more essential understanding of human experience. What these thinkers understood, and what many of us have forgotten, is that there's a crucial difference between solitude and negative social isolation. The solitude they advocated wasn't the painful feeling of disconnection, but the nourishing state of self-connection. The neuroscience of solitude, how being alone changes your brain. A fascinating Harvard University study monitored participants' brain activity during periods of voluntary solitude versus periods of social interaction. Researchers discovered that during meaningful solitude, defined as time alone without digital or external distractions, the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with higher-order thinking, showed greater connectivity with executive attention networks and less activation of networks associated with social conformity and reward-based thinking. In other words, when we're truly alone, we literally think differently, with more independence, depth, and authenticity. Schopenhauer observed this long before neuroscience, writing, "Ordinary people merely think how they shall spend their time. A man of talent tries to use it." He understood that solitude allows a quality of thought impossible to achieve in continuous social environment. Thoreau complemented this view when writing in Walden, "I am never less alone than when alone, nor more active than when quiet." He discovered that solitude wasn't a state of deprivation, but of fullness, a space where he could hear himself without the constant distortion of social noise. A University of Buffalo study found something remarkable. People who have a healthy relationship with solitude demonstrate 41% more self-directed behaviors and 36% less susceptibility to peer pressure. Even more surprising, those who regularly practice voluntary solitude are 44% more likely to report a clearly defined sense of purpose. This aligns perfectly with Schopenhauer's observation that almost all of our sorrows spring out of our relations with other people. He perceived how dependence on constant social interaction not only diminishes our capacity for independent thought, but also makes us more vulnerable to manipulative influences. Thoreau addressed the same phenomenon from another perspective when he wrote, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." In his view, this desperation resulted precisely from the inability to be comfortably alone, to face oneself without society's distractions. The paradox of connection, how solitude enhances relationships. But perhaps Schopenhauer's deepest insight about solitude was his understanding that the quality of our social interactions is directly proportional to our capacity to be alone. He wrote, "The capacity to endure solitude and to enjoy it well is the condition for true sociability." In other words, those who can't be alone tend to use social interactions not for genuine connection, but to escape themselves, turning relationships into distractions rather than authentic encounters. Thoreau would agree. When he wrote, "I would rather sit on a pumpkin and have it all to myself than be crowded on a velvet cushion," he wasn't rejecting community, but recognizing that social interactions based on fleeing from oneself are fundamentally superficial. A 2020 study from Durham University seems to confirm this view. Researchers found that participants who regularly practiced intentional solitude, defined as distraction-free alone time dedicated to reflection, reported greater satisfaction and depth in their social relationships than those constantly seeking interaction. The study's conclusion suggests that the ability to be comfortably alone may be a prerequisite for forming meaningful interpersonal connections. This is deeply counterintuitive in our current culture, where solitude is often pathologized and constant connectivity is celebrated. But both Schopenhauer and Thoreau understood that there's something fundamentally debilitating about never directly facing yourself. As Schopenhauer observed, the common man is concerned with how he shall spend his time, the man of talent with how to use it. Solitude, far from being a state of deprivation, is the space where we can finally distinguish our own thoughts from the absorbed opinions of the world around us. Thoreau put this more poetically when he wrote, "I am no more lonely than the loon in the pond that laughs so loud, or than Walden Pond itself." He understood solitude not as isolation, but as a return to true nature. The modern epidemic of solitude avoidance. What's particularly relevant for us today is how both thinkers predicted, with frightening accuracy, the dangers of a society that systematically avoids solitude. Schopenhauer warned, "Happiness belongs to those who are sufficient unto themselves." He predicted that people unable to be alone would become increasingly manipulable, more anxious, and more superficial in their thinking. Thoreau was equally prophetic when he wrote, "Men have become the tools of their tools." He feared a society so immersed in constant distraction and stimulation that it would lose the capacity for deep contemplation. A recent University of Virginia study offers a disturbing glimpse of how accurate this prediction has become. Researchers found that 67% of male participants and 25% of female participants preferred to receive painful electric shocks rather than sit alone with their own thoughts for just 15 minutes. The study concluded that the contemporary human mind seems to have developed an aversion to its own company. This is precisely the condition that both Schopenhauer and Thoreau most feared. A humanity so dependent on external stimuli and social validation that it has lost the ability to inhabit its own interior. Practical application. Cultivating meaningful solitude. How then can we cultivate a healthy relationship with solitude in a world that seems to conspire against it? Here are 5 practices deeply rooted in the teachings of Schopenhauer and Thoreau. First, practice deliberate and disconnected solitude. Schopenhauer advocated what he called refuge in oneself, regular periods of voluntary isolation to recover your true identity. Thoreau was even more radical, abandoning society for 2 years to live in relative solitude. As he wrote, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life." Practical exercise. Set aside at least 30 minutes daily, ideally an hour, for genuine disconnected solitude. This means no phone, internet, books, music, or any other form of external input. It can be in a quiet room, in nature, or even on a solitary walk. The important thing is that you're completely alone with your own thoughts. At first, this will likely be uncomfortable. You'll feel an almost irresistible urge to check your phone or seek some form of distraction. This discomfort is precisely what Schopenhauer would identify as your social self, resisting the encounter with your authentic self. Second, develop the practice of self-questioning. Schopenhauer believed that most of our opinions aren't really ours. They're unconsciously absorbed from our culture, education, and social circle. Solitude allows us to identify which thoughts are genuinely our own. Thoreau expressed a similar sentiment. Don't worry if you have built your castles in the air. That's where they should be. Now put the foundations under them. Practical exercise. During your solitude time, keep a self-questioning journal. For each strong belief or opinion you hold, ask, where did this idea come from? Is it something I developed independently, or something I absorbed? If no one else in the world agreed with me, would I still hold this position? This exercise isn't meant to invalidate your beliefs, but to distinguish those that are authentically yours from those you've adopted for conformity or acceptance. Third, cultivate friendships that respect solitude. Schopenhauer made a paradoxical observation. The measure of an intellect is its capacity to tolerate solitude, but he also recognized the importance of meaningful relationships, as long as they're based on mutual respect for independence. Thoreau, despite his isolation experiment, maintained deep friendships, especially with Ralph Waldo Emerson. He wrote, "The smallest movement is of importance to all of nature. The entire ocean is affected by a pebble." Practical exercise. Evaluate your current relationships based on how they affect your ability to be alone. Ask yourself, does this person respect my need for space and time for myself? Do I feel drained or energized after being with them? Does this relationship encourage me to be more authentically myself or to conform? Gradually reorient your social life to prioritize relationships that honor your need for solitude and authenticity. Fourth, practice mindfulness in nature. Although Schopenhauer was notoriously urban, he deeply valued contemplation of nature as a way to transcend the social ego and connect with deeper realities. Thoreau, meanwhile, found in nature the ideal environment for meaningful solitude. "I became rich," he wrote, "not by what I possessed, but by what I could do without." Practical exercise. At least once a week, spend an hour alone in nature without digital distractions. This isn't about aerobic walking or exercise, but about conscious presence. Observe details you would normally ignore. The texture of a leaf, the pattern of shadows on the ground, the sound of the wind. As Thoreau would suggest, become a transparent eyeball, observing without judgment. This practice helps deactivate the brain's social mode that's constantly concerned with status and comparison, allowing a more direct experience of reality. Fifth, resist the tyranny of constant connectivity. Schopenhauer warned against what he called the society of common people, the constant pressure to conform to social expectations and rhythms. Thoreau would be even more critical of our modern digital culture, as he wrote, "Our inventions are but improved means to an unimproved end. We are in great haste to construct a magnetic telegraph from Maine to Texas. But Maine and Texas, it may be, have nothing important to communicate." Practical exercise. Implement digital boundaries in your life. This might include turning off phone notifications, establishing specific times to check emails and social media, rather than doing so impulsively, creating technology-free zones in your home, like the bedroom or dining table, and practicing complete digital silence days at least once a month. Remember Schopenhauer's words, "Noise is a torture to thinking minds." He understood that the constant intrusion of external stimuli prevents the kind of deep thinking that only emerges in silence. Real-life applications, from theory to practice. Let's see how these principles can be applied in 3 common scenarios of modern life. Situation 1. Social anxiety and FOMO, fear of missing out. Typical problem. You constantly check social media.
Fear missing events, and feel anxiety when not connected. Even when physically alone, you're mentally immersed in digital social life. Schopenhauer-Thoreau perspective. Schopenhauer would observe that your fear of missing social experiences reveals dependence on external validation.
Thoreau would add that you're trading the richness of direct experience for second-hand living. Transformative response. I recognize that my fear of being alone reflects a disconnection from myself. Instead of compulsively checking what others are doing,
I'll dedicate that time to rediscovering my own genuine interests. I'll start with 30 minutes daily of non-negotiable time with myself, without phone, computer, or any external connection. Gradually, I'll increase this time as I become more comfortable with my own company. I'll remember Thoreau's words. I prefer the silent words that arise from solitude to the empty echo of social conversation. Situation 2. Information overload and decision fatigue. Typical problem. You feel constantly overwhelmed with contradictory opinions, news and information, resulting in decision fatigue and uncertainty about what you truly believe. Schopenhauer-Thoreau perspective. Schopenhauer would point out that you're drowning your own inner voice in the noise of external voices. Thoreau would suggest, simplify, 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 reducing inputs to clarify your own thinking. Transformative response. I realize I'm consuming far more information than I can meaningfully process. I'll establish an information budget, consciously limiting my consumption of news, podcasts, and social media content to specific times with defined duration. I'll implement a weekly information fast, an entire day without new inputs. During this time, I'll process and integrate what I've already absorbed, rather than constantly seeking new data. I'll dedicate at least 1 hour weekly to writing my own reflections on a topic important to me, developing my own thinking before consulting external opinions. Situation 3. Fragmented identity across multiple social roles. Typical problem. You present yourself drastically differently in different contexts, work, family, friends, online, to the point of feeling you've lost touch with who you really are. Schopenhauer-Thoreau perspective. Schopenhauer would say you've confused your persona, social mask, with your true self. Thoreau would observe that you're living a life of quiet desperation, externally adapted, but internally alienated. Transformative response. I recognize that I've adapted my personality for different contexts so much that I've lost touch with my authentic core. I'll begin keeping an authenticity journal, where I'll document moments when I feel fully myself versus moments when I'm playing a role. I'll seek regular periods of solitude where I can undress all these social identities and rediscover who I am when no one is watching. Gradually, I'll work to align my external behavior more consistently with my internal values, even if that occasionally means challenging social expectations. As Thoreau wrote, if a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Reclaiming the art of being alone, the path to authentic living. Let's recap the fundamental principles we've explored. 1. Solitude is not a state of deprivation, but a necessary space for authenticity and mental clarity. 2. Our capacity to form genuine relationships is directly proportional to our ability to be comfortably alone. 3. Most thoughts we consider ours are absorbed from the social environment. Solitude allows us to distinguish our true beliefs. 4. Modern society, with its constant connectivity, is systematically eroding our capacity for independent thought. 5. Nature offers an ideal context for meaningful solitude, allowing us to temporarily escape the pressure of social conformity. 6. The initial resistance to being alone is a symptom of dependence on external validation, a condition both philosophers would consider incompatible with mental freedom. 7. The paradox of solitude is that, far from isolating us, it prepares us for more authentic connections with others. Schopenhauer warned us that vulgarity consists in basing one's worth on the value that others attribute to us. A century later, modern psychology confirms that excessive dependence on external validation is associated with greater vulnerability to depression, anxiety, and self-destructive behavior. Thoreau complemented this view by observing that a man's wealth is measured by the number of things he can afford to leave alone. He understood that true freedom doesn't come from accumulating more connections, more experiences, more stimuli, but from cultivating the capacity to be content with less. As Schopenhauer wrote, a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. If he does not love solitude, he does not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free. And Thoreau echoed, I never found a companion that was so companionable as solitude. Together they offer us a radical invitation, especially in our era of hyperconnectivity, to rediscover the transformative power of being genuinely alone, not as an escape from life, but as preparation for living it more fully. A call to conscious solitude, finding your true voice. Look honestly at your own life. How much time do you spend truly alone with your own thoughts, without external distractions? When was the last time you experienced the kind of solitude that Schopenhauer and Thoreau considered essential for mental clarity and inner freedom? In a world that treats solitude as a disease to be avoided at all costs, choosing to be alone becomes an act of quiet rebellion, a statement that you value your authenticity above constant conformity. As Schopenhauer observed, solitude offers man, as an individual, his independence. And as Thoreau recalled after his experiment at Walden, I left the woods for as good a reason as I went there. Perhaps it seemed to me that I had several more lives to live, and could not spare any more time for that one. Solitude is not an end in itself, but a means to a richer, more authentic, and more deliberate existence. It's not about rejecting human connection, but ensuring that when we connect, we do so from a genuine sense of who we are, not just as echoes of social expectations. Today I invite you to a simple but potentially transformative challenge. Set aside 1 hour, completely alone, without phone, media, or books, just you and your thoughts. Observe the initial resistance, the restlessness, the impulse to seek distraction, and then observe what happens when you persist through that discomfort, the gradual clarity, the feeling of returning to yourself, the rediscovery of an inner voice that may have been silenced by the constant noise of modern life. In our next video, Face Your Darkness or It Will Destroy You, Carl Jung and Peterson's Rule, we'll explore the dark side of the human psyche, how denied and repressed aspects of ourselves eventually emerge in destructive ways when not consciously integrated. You'll discover why facing your own shadow is not just an act of personal courage, but an ethical responsibility to those you love. If this video resonated with you, share in the comments. In solitude, I find my true voice. Let's see how many are ready to rediscover the transformative power of being genuinely alone. Until our next meeting.